So let's talk about arousal. The reason I'm talking about arousal and orientation with regard to head injuries is because oftentimes the next tests that you're going to be seeing are done in the ER. So we want to look at evaluating severity. So the Glasgow Coma scale is something that is administered in the ER. It's something that paramedics would also give as well. And it's the reason that I'm going over these instruments is because you might see them in medical reports. So if you're getting medical reports and you see that he had a GCS of 8, that's a problem. Because anything 8 or less, you have a 50% mortality rate for. So if you have someone with a GCS of 8, that's no bueno. It assesses eye, motor, and verbal responses to external stimuli, and it ranges from 3 to 15. 3 is no response, 15 is normal response, and 13 to 15 is in normal range, whereas, as I said, if you're looking at someone under an 8 on the GCS, then that's a critical score. Ranchos Los Amigos was actually created in Ranchos Los Amigos in Downey, California, which is a rehabilitation center. It's actually one of the most renowned rehabilitation centers on the West Coast. It's also known as the Ranchos Los Amigos Level of Cognitive Functioning Scale, or the LOCF Rancho Scale. And it's somewhat like the Glasgow Coma scale. It looks at different areas of functioning. And then the MMSE and the Cognostat are two things that we look at. The MMSE and the GOAT are very similar in that they look at different areas of functioning, including memory. The Cognostat has a motor component to it. That's another slide of what the Glasgow Coma scale is. Yeah, and if they were less than 8 in medical records, you can go whoop. That's important. That's really a significant finding, because that means that person probably had some brain damage.
Right.
That now that you're testing them 3 years later, that's important to note in your report that medical records from Valley Medical Center from this date indicated that when he came in, he had a GCS, well, you would actually spell it out,
right,
of 8 that improved over 2 weeks' time. Okay, but you would want to note that in your report.
These are the guys that want to take a history. They'll say, I had to learn to walk and talk again after
Yes.
this accident.
Absolutely. Anytime you have someone with a head injury, you want to learn everything you possibly can about that head injury. You want to know how long were they out? How long did they lose consciousness? What was their post-traumatic amnesia? Now, post-traumatic amnesia, as measured by the GOAT and others, can be either retrograde or anterograde. And what post-traumatic amnesia is the time either before or after the accident that they can't remember till. So if they fell off a ladder and hit their head and they can't remember the whole week before, that's significant. All right, post-traumatic amnesia for a week before, retrograde. If they say, I can't remember the accident and I woke up in the hospital a week later, but they said I was walking and talking and interacting with nurses during that whole week, then they have post-traumatic amnesia for that week. They hadn't lost consciousness for that week. They just weren't cognizant of making new memories. So all of that is important to note, and it can indicate a severity of head injury. Let's talk about types of traumatic brain injury. So there's many different types of traumatic brain injury, but they kind of come down to 2 different areas, open and closed head injury. So some studies say that traumatic brain injury is the leading cause of death among children and young people in the U.S. Most common types of brain injuries in children and adults used to be motor vehicle accidents. But the newest research that's coming out, 35% are from falls. And 27% are still from motor vehicle accidents, traffic accidents. 22% unknown, 16% struck by something, and 10% from assault. The newest for wartime is the improvised explosive devices, 64% wartime injury, with 85% of those resulting in some sort of traumatic brain injury. Now this is an example of what a penetrating head injury or an open head injury looks like. This lady was a 78-year-old lady who slipped and fell on her key. Yeah, that's smarts. She recovered. This gentleman, I believe, was a construction worker in his 20s who also survived. So these guys are more likely to die. They have a higher mortality rate. However, it's a 6-to-1 mortality rate. And, the highest, the leading cause of penetrating head injuries is gunshot wounds. But those that survive will have more focal injury because it's specific to that area. Whereas closed head injuries are a lot worse for the survivor. Specifically because the brain bounces around inside the skull. So you're driving and you're hit head on. Your brain has just hit this part of your skull and then it bounces back. So that was the coup injury, the contra coup injury, and back and forth inside your skull. Now that's really bad because what's right here? Bony protrusions that shear off the front of your brain. Not good. And so the closed head injuries, number one is the motor vehicle accident. But they can also have auto versus pedestrian. You'll see that noted. A motorcycle, falls, violence, and then 50 to 80% of them are worse because of the contra coup. And that's when the brain bounces back. Most of these result in diffuse axonal injury. How many of you have heard of the diffuse axonal injury? So this is the axon of the brain. It's just, hanging out here doing its own thing, not bothering anyone, and here you go, get in a car accident. Suddenly, it's twisted around, causing damage to it. The diffuse axonal injury is where the axon tears and the clusters of it comes out and it starts to swell and it becomes more damaged and you're straining the axons. Now the thing is that most neuroimaging doesn't actually show the DAI. The newest instruments that are out there, there's a diffusion tensor imaging and fMRIs. They actually only show this type of injury about 15% of the time. The rest of the time you can have all of your neurons in a whack and the neuroimaging isn't going to show it, but neuropsych testing will. And it won't show specifically that there's diffuse axonal injuries. What it will show is that there is brain damage and functioning loss in different domains. And that's why it's important to do this type of testing. Now, concussion versus traumatic brain injury. We are looking at concussions. We're looking at mild concussions or seeing stars. All right? That's a short period of confusion. It's over very quickly. A classic concussion involves cardiovascular changes, maybe even seizure-like experience, and it's 20 to 30 minutes. It includes nausea, dizziness, maybe even loss of memory. Any period of loss of consciousness not exceeding 30 minutes, loss of memory for events, and post-traumatic amnesia not greater than 24 hours is considered to be a concussion. It becomes a traumatic brain injury when the confusion lasts for more than 24 hours and there's symptoms of the diffuse axonal injury. If it resolves within a few days, but it was more than one day. The newest research that's coming out is saying that NCAM, which stands for neuronal cell adhesion molecule. I say that again. Neuronal cell adhesion molecules. This is found to be something that stabilizes the synapse of our cells in our brain. Any kind of traumatic stress has a surge of cortisol that goes up and damages the NCAM, and it dissolves that molecule, especially in the hippocampus. This is thought to be what is causing post-traumatic amnesia. So if you're in a sudden accident and your brain is injured, you get this shot of cortisol that goes up and actually dissolves the molecule that's holding your synapses together, and that's causing the amnesia. So that's why we're not able to make new memories during that. So the Harvard study, this is a great study that's recently come out, 2011, and it's talking about specifically about the brain with our combat veterans. I really just love this slide, is why I put it up here. Oh, you can't even see that well. Okay, so this is a slide of something called a blast wave. This is a penetrating head injury, specifically shrapnel hit the brain, and this is the coup contra coup picture of the brain bouncing around inside. Blast waves are different. They don't necessarily cause the diffuse axonal injury. What a blast wave is a concussive force that hits someone, pushing them back, and it really causes a depressurization. And it causes damage to internal organs, sometimes to the point of liquefying. But people who survive a blast wave are reporting the same types of injuries and problems with attention concentration and whatnot. There's a lot to do with it, having to do with the blood vessels caving in and gaseous emboli evolving, going up to the brain and causing all types of problems. In any case, 2011, Harvard, the bioengineers of Harvard came up with and started to explain for the first time how our troops are affected by different head injuries. Specifically, when experiencing a jarring force, or from either being physically hit or one of these concussive blast waves, they're reporting longer-term problems with memory and concentration. And what they're finding is this is a normal neuron. This is a neuron that's been damaged, specifically from a head injury. And they're finding that when someone experiences a head injury of this type, the integrins of the receptor proteins send a message to the cell to retract their dendrites. And so the cells are actually retracting that, and then they start to swell, which is causing more and more damage to the surrounding cells. But what they found was, with certain medications, if they can give the person a medication within 10 minutes of a head injury, that it reduces the swelling and therefore causes the cells to actually be able to heal faster. I mean, this is cutting edge research, so if they can actually identify what the molecules are in the medications, then the study went into a lot about the specific medications, so if you're interested